Hey everyone! Tonight we're leaving behind the comfort of soft beds and stepping into the roaring chaos of ancient Rome's most infamous job interview, the Coliseum. Forget polished resumes and awkward small talk. This is where your qualifications are judged by lions, your references carry swords, and failure means, well, you only fail once. Imagine being handed a dull gladius, shoved into the blazing sun and told to impress 30,000 screaming spectators, most of whom are just here for the blood. There's no orientation, no break room, and definitely no HR. Just dust, fear, and the hope that the guy you're fighting missed breakfast. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, let your mind wander, and allow the gentle rhythm of my voice to lull you towards sleep. Maybe settle in, pull your blanket a little closer, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Let's set the scene. You wake up groggy, sand in your mouth, your back aches from sleeping on stone, the air smells like sweat, dust, and something metallic. Blood, probably. Somewhere above you cheers thunder like the sea. You're in the belly of the Coliseum, Rome's most beloved monument to collective bloodlust, and it's your big day. You didn't apply for this job. You weren't recruited. You were volunteered by life or fate or that minor crime you committed last spring that snowballed into this. Welcome to the Flavian Amphitheatre, better known to us as the Coliseum. Finished in 80 AD, it's a sprawling stone and concrete juggernaut of death-themed entertainment. Built atop what used to be Emperor Nero's private pleasure palace. Yes, really. This arena was Rome's grand attempt at winning back public favour through brutal, crowd-pleasing distractions. You see, Rome had one golden rule for keeping people in line: bread and circuses. Panem et circenses. Feed them, entertain them, and they'll forget just about anything else, like the fact they're starving, overtaxed, and living under a bloated, paranoid bureaucracy. You're now part of that distraction. Let's pause here, shall we? Before you panic. Before the gate rises and the sunlight hits your face and 30,000 people rise to their feet, ready to watch you die. Let's talk job description. You're not a professional gladiator. Those guys, the ludus elite, get training, medical care, contracts, and sometimes even fans. You're something worse. You're filler. You're here to lose. You might be a prisoner of war, a runaway slave, a bankrupt debtor, or simply an unlucky soul caught up in one of Rome's many judicial roundups. Your official title today? Noxi. That's Latin for the condemned. Your purpose? To make the real gladiators look good. Or alternatively to play the part of the criminal villain in a heavily scripted, gore-soaked morality play. Think of it like community theatre, except instead of applause, there's a lion. And instead of a script, there's a death warrant. Let's talk about the arena itself. It's massive, 4 stories tall, seating up to 50,000 people. Every class has its section, with the best seats saved for senators, nobles, and vestal virgins. The emperor sits front and centre, because obviously. The floor of the arena, it's wooden, covered with sand. Why sand? Because it soaks up blood. Efficient. Below that, a complex system of trapdoors, lifts and cages, an underground maze called the Hyppageum. That's where you've been all night, listening to animals howl, men pray, and the occasional execution play rehearsal. Yes, that's a thing. We'll get to it. Now, depending on what the editor, that's the guy who organises the games, has planned, you might be scheduled for one of several acts. Option 1. You're dressed up as a mythological figure reenacting a famous death scene, say Icarus, except instead of flying too close to the sun, you're catapulted into the air and fall to your death. Allegorical. Option 2. You're part of a mock naval battle. Yes, they flood the Coliseum for this, and yes, you can drown. It's deeply impressive, also horrifying. Option 3. The animal show. You're told to fight a bear with a stick. The bear has claws, you do the math. Option 4. The main event, the Munus, gladiators, shields, swords, one-on-one. Fair fight theoretically, but remember, you're not trained. They are. This is not about fairness, it's about spectacle. And here's the kicker. The crowd decides if you live. If by some miracle you survive, the Emperor might turn his thumb upward, mercy, or downward, death. Though honestly, the whole thumb thing is probably a myth. More likely it was just a hand gesture or a shout. Either way, you're not in control. The job review is final, no appeal process. And the HR department is a leopard. Let's shift tone for a moment. Because while this all sounds absurd, and it is, it's also real. For hundreds of years, people gathered to watch others be torn apart. Children sat next to their parents, munching chickpea snacks as men screamed and died. There were programs, merch, betting booths. The Coliseum wasn't just a place of execution. It was a machine of myth-making, a propaganda engine, a reminder of what happened when you stepped out of line. Rome turned cruelty into theatre, pain into policy. And yet, people cheered. They adored it. And why wouldn't they? Life was hard, short, uncertain. Watching someone else suffer, especially someone labelled a criminal or outsider, was a cathartic release. A reminder that for now you were safe. That's the dark genius of the games. They made fear entertaining. And so, my unlucky friend, you stand behind the gate. You hear the chant rise. You feel the door shudder. This is your interview. And you're not getting the job. You know what no one tells you about being executed in the Coliseum? It takes forever. Not the dying part. That's usually quick. But the waiting, agonising. You're not even the first act. That honour goes to the animal trainers and exotic beasts. Picture elephants, ostriches, leopards, and sometimes giraffes just wandering around like it's a surreal petting zoo. Except the giraffes are confused and the ostriches are angry. Sometimes they stage elaborate animal hunts called venations. Imagine a rhinoceros being poked at by guys with spears, while a trumpet player tries to keep the mood festive. Meanwhile, the crowd is placing bets on whether the rhino tramples its hunter or gets confused and bolts into the seating section. And there you are, backstage, wrapped in a borrowed tunic, listening to the roars of 30,000 sunburned Romans. Let's talk costumes. Because yes, you're getting dressed for this. Not in armour, of course. That would give you a fighting chance. You're in a theme. The editor has decided today's executions will be theatrical. Which means, lucky you, you're going to play a character. Maybe you're Orpheus trying to charm wild beasts with your music, except instead of a lyre you have a fake one made of wood, and instead of beasts being charmed, they are not. They are biting. The crowd loves this stuff. See, the Coliseum wasn't just Rome's death engine, it was its cinema. Special effects, props, makeup, even trapdoors to simulate divine intervention. It was violent fan fiction, live. One day, they might stage the myth of Prometheus and tie a man to a rock so a trained eagle can nibble at his liver. Another day, a condemned man becomes Hercules, but the 12 labours are compressed into 12 frantic seconds. most of which involve being punched by a guy in a lion mask. You might laugh, but the audience didn't. They loved this. And the weirder it was, the better. Rome was obsessed with symbolism. If you stole something, you might be crucified dressed as Mercury, god of thieves. If you committed arson, you could be burned alive in costume as Vulcan. It's morality cosplay with real stakes. The Romans thought of it as justice with the narrative arc, and while this is happening, the vendors are walking the aisles. Roasted nuts, wine in clay cups, honey cakes, fried cheese. The scent drifts down as you step into the light. Somewhere in the distance, a boy is shouting the latest betting odds. A woman yells for someone to sit down so she can see better. A senator adjusts his toga, and every eye turns to you. You, the underwhelming star of Act 2. Here's the funny part. Sometimes the crowd roots for you, especially if you're plucky, or tragic, or you trip and look adorably doomed. There are cases where the crowd demanded mercy, and emperors eager for applause might grant it. They called it a missio, a release, and for a handful of lucky, bruised, barely alive souls, it meant crawling out of the sand and living another day. Of course, sometimes the crowd just booed until someone finished you off. Rome had opinions. Now, maybe you survived this one act. Maybe your opponent is old. Maybe he slips. Maybe the sun blinds him for a moment and you get in a lucky jab with your wooden practice sword. The crowd gasps. This is not how the script was supposed to go. But now they're intrigued. Could you win? Number. But it's entertaining to pretend you might. Remember, this isn't just blood sport, it's audience participation, a mass emotional event. They feel something when you stumble and rise again. It distracts them from the taxes, the grain shortage, the corruption, the plague. You are the sacrificial substitute for their anxiety. So you rise, you bleed, you almost matter. And then, just like that, it's over. Maybe you fall. Maybe the next guy doesn't miss. Maybe the crowd cheers, or sighs, or forgets you instantly as they turn their attention to the next novelty. A duel on horseback, or a condemned man tied to a chariot and dragged around like a cautionary tale. And you? You're either carted off, or if you were popular, cremated with a little more ceremony. A few fans might even write your name on the wall. Gladiator groupies were a real thing, you know. Let's pull back for a second. The Coliseum wasn't just a monument, it was a system, a living metaphor. It told Romans what they were allowed to be, who was in charge, who mattered, who didn't. It was entertainment, yes, but it was also a message. This is power, and this is what happens without it. The audience laughed and cheered and bet and cursed because it reminded them that they were not in your place, not yet, not today, but they could be. And so they clapped harder. The gates creak open. Sunlight blasts your face like a god's flashlight. The roar of 50,000 spectators crashes over you like a wave, and you step out into the arena, blinking, sweating, vibrating with pure panic. Congratulations. You've made it to your first, and probably last, day on the job. You try to take it all in. The vast oval of the Coliseum feels endless. The seats spiral upward like some kind of stone volcano, packed with bodies, all eyes fixed on you. Somewhere out there, the Emperor watches, perhaps nibbling on dates. Maybe he's even in a good mood today. You'd really like him to be in a good mood. Your costume is itchy. The helmet doesn't fit. Your weapon is more prop than protection. And your opponent? He's already flexing dramatically, waving to the crowd like he's Caesar himself. You are not winning this fight. But let's pause again, because while you're about to be extremely murdered, it's worth asking, How did Rome get here? How did a city of roads, laws, poets and aqueducts decide that the best use of a weekend afternoon was to throw humans into a death pit and rate the performance? Let's rewind. Origins of the games. Gladiatorial combat didn't start in the Coliseum. It didn't even start in Rome. The earliest known examples go back to the Etruscans, the pre-Roman civilization in Italy. These ritual duels were connected to funerals, a way to honour the dead with the blood of the living. But Rome, being Rome, took this already dark idea and scaled it up until it reached a sort of horrifying grandeur. The first recorded Roman gladiator contest was in 264 BCE. Just 3 pairs fought during a funeral. Fast forward a few centuries, and you've got emperors like Trajan hosting games with over 10,000 gladiators. That's not a funeral. That's a genocide with stadium seating. The games weren't just entertainment. They were political theatre. Emperors used them to curry favour with the masses, show off their wealth, and distract people from, say, war, plague, inflation, or a sudden shortage of olive oil. Sound familiar? Gladiators. The rock stars of Rome? Now let's not lump all the fighters together. There were levels. Think of it like a performance hierarchy. At the bottom, you, untrained, disposable, just here for narrative flair. In the middle, trained gladiators from the ludi, gladiator schools. Some were slaves, yes, but some were volunteers, octorati, free citizens who signed up for fame, money, or the pure thrill of it. The Roman version of I quit my job to follow my dream. At the top, champions, gladiator influencers basically. They had fan clubs, graffiti, merchandise. Wealthy women wrote them love letters. Some were even buried with honours. Fame through near-death experience. But even these stars had a shelf life. Very few gladiators lived past 30. Turns out dodging swords for a living isn't great for your long-term wellness. Back in the arena, your opponent circles you like a hungry cat. You're already sweating through your tunic. The sun is merciless. The sand burns your feet, and the crowd is hungry. Not for food, but for violence. You raise your wooden shield. You try not to cry. You whisper a prayer to whichever god might be available, and then he lunges. Pain, confusion. You hit the ground hard. The taste of blood mixes with the dust in your mouth. Something might be broken. Definitely your dignity. He stands over you, sword raised, ready to finish the job. But wait. He hesitates. He turns to the crowd, arms out, asking them, "Should this one live?" The emperor leans forward. The audience murmurs. You, face down in the sand, dare to hope. And then, mercy. For now. You're dragged out of the arena. Bleeding, broken, but alive. You'll be patched up, maybe. Fed, if you're lucky. Sent back to the hippodrome to wait for your next performance. Because this isn't over. The games run all day, and tomorrow, and the day after that. There are still criminals to punish, beasts to unleash, myths to reenact, and messages to send. The Empire is watching, and the show must go on. Intermission. What did the Romans really think? Let's not pretend every Roman citizen loved this. Plenty of writers, Seneca, Cicero, even the ever-grumpy Juvenal, criticised the games. They saw them as a moral rot, a symptom of Rome's descent into excess and cruelty. But criticism was risky, and the masses, they loved it. It was free, it was thrilling, it was Roman, and the Empire knew it. So every emperor worth his laurel wreath kept the games going. Domitian, Trajan, Marcus Aurelius. Even the Stoic philosophers understood that blood won loyalty, or at least distraction. The Coliseum wasn't a glitch in the Roman system, it was the system. Backstage, again. You lie in the dark, stitched up with goat gut and given a stale crust of bread. Someone mutters a joke in Latin. Another man sobs. You close your eyes and try to pretend you're somewhere else. Anywhere else. But tomorrow they might dress you up as Prometheus and chain you to a rock while a trained eagle pecks at your chest. Or maybe you'll be Orpheus, serenading lions who've skipped breakfast. You don't know. You just wait. And above you, in the marble seats of power, the city laughs and cheers. Because for them it's just a show. Another morning. Another arena call time. Your body aches in new, inventive ways. Someone next to you is coughing blood. Someone else is still muttering last night's prayers. But you? You're getting the deluxe package today. Makeup, costume, and lines. Because guess what? Today isn't about combat. It's theatre, but Roman style. Mythological reenactments. Murder with a theme. Sometimes the crowd didn't want two guys swinging swords. Too mundane, too predictable. What they craved was a good story, a fable, a splashy bit of mythology to go with their midday snack. And so, Rome gave it to them. You might be dressed as Hercules, chained between two pillars, or as Daedalus, given fake wings and pushed off a platform. Or maybe you're poor Actaeon, running in circles in a deer costume while dogs tear you apart. Don't worry, the dogs are real. This was theatre with real stakes. No trapdoors, no illusion. If the myth involved fire, you were lit on fire. If it involved dismemberment, well, hope your will's in order. Execution, rebranded. The Romans were efficient in everything, including punishment. But why waste a good execution when you can turn it into a show? Criminals sentenced to death weren't just killed, they were staged. They were turned into cautionary tales. Break the law and next thing you know, you're playing Sisyphus and being crushed under a real boulder, or being mauled while dressed as a mythological villain. The message was clear: behave or be spectacle. Animals, the other cast members, the Venacion, beast hunts. Before gladiators took the stage, before the reenactments began, the morning shows were reserved for animals, exotic ones, imported ones. The more expensive the better. Lions from Africa, tigers from India, crocodiles, elephants, bears, ostriches, even giraffes if you can believe it. Sometimes they were made to fight each other. Sometimes they fought men with spears. Sometimes they were simply slaughtered en masse for spectacle. And sometimes, like today, they're paired with a human actor for added dramatic effect. Lucky you. The crowd, Rome's true rulers. It's easy to think of the emperor as the one calling the shots. And sure, technically he is. But if he wants to stay popular, he has to please the real power. The people in the seats, the mob, the crowd, the public. They decide which fighters become legends. They choose mercy or death. Their applause can boost an emperor's popularity or crush it. Rome was a republic in name, then an empire in law. But in the Coliseum, it was a democracy of blood. And right now, they want a show. Your big scene. You are Prometheus, or at least the underfed, slightly limping version of him. You're chained to a fake mountain, shirtless, painted bronze, and very much regretting that pickpocketing incident that got you here. They bring out the eagle. The crowd roars. You close your eyes. Pain arrives. The good news? The eagle handler is half drunk and the bird is mostly confused. The bad news? You still have 3 more acts today. Why did they love this? You might wonder, as the eagle pecks gently at your ribs. Why? Why did Romans love this so much? It's not just cruelty, it's control. Watching others suffer under the rules reminded citizens that they weren't suffering arbitrarily. The Empire had laws, punishments, structure. It was a grim reassurance. And, well, life was rough. Watching a man in a goat suit get chased by panthers? That was escapism, cheap laughs, catharsis. Also, humans are weird. End of Act 1. As the sun dips lower, the crowd thins out. You're dragged backstage, bleeding but breathing. A fellow performer winks at you with half a black eye. The eagle sits in the corner, sulking. You get a crust of bread, some vinegar wine, a slap on the back. You survived Act 1. Act 2? Well, that involves a fake chariot, 3 half-naked dancers, and a large angry baboon. But that's tomorrow's problem. Dawn again. Your eyes barely open, your limbs scream. You're still alive, which in your current profession feels like both a blessing and a bureaucratic error. Another day, another chance to be symbolic roadkill for the sake of empire. This time, there's no weapon in your hand, just a prop lyre and a wreath they've tied to your head with twine. You're not a gladiator today, you're a myth. Congratulations, you're now playing Orpheus. But don't let the poetry fool you. This isn't art. This is Roman dinner theatre with a body count. Myths in the meat grinder sea. The Romans loved a good mythological reenactment, but their idea of reenactment was a little more literal. If the myth ended in a dramatic death, perfect. The crowd knew the story, knew the ending, and waited gleefully to watch it unfold in real time with real blood. You're part of what's called a fatal charade, and it's exactly what it sounds like. Public execution disguised as storytelling. They didn't just kill people, they turned the act into theatre. Criminals, prisoners of war, condemned slaves, all drafted into these gruesome roles. Imagine being cast as Icarus, only to be shoved off a wooden platform and told to flap. Or being Daedalus, strapped into wax wings and set on fire for the audience's delight. Or poor Marsyas, the satyr flayed alive after challenging Apollo. That one was a crowd pleaser. In your case, as Orpheus, you're expected to sing to the animals. There's even a stage set up to resemble the underworld. Papier-mâché rocks, a painted sticks, skeletons on wires. It would be funny if not for the lions. The beasts below. The Coliseum wasn't just a place for men to die. It was a menagerie of nightmares. Beneath the arena, in the hypogym, cages and elevators stored a terrifying zoo. Lions, tigers, leopards, elephants, bears, even crocodiles. Imported from across the empire, Africa, Asia, the Middle East, these creatures were Rome's flex, a statement that not even nature could resist their dominance. Beast hunts, venations, were often the opening act. Think of it as a warm-up bloodbath. Trained hunters, condemned criminals, or sometimes just unlucky amateurs would fight wild animals for public amusement. Sometimes they won, often they didn't. Either way, it was spectacle. The floor of the arena was built with trapdoors and lifts, so animals could appear out of nowhere. One moment you're standing in sand, the next, tiger, and they loved a surprise. Entire fake forests would be erected overnight, palms, bushes, painted backdrops, and then suddenly a rhinoceros charges out of the greenery. Why? Because it was Tuesday, and Rome was bored. Execution with flair. The midday shows, after the animal acts but before the big gladiator duels, were reserved for public executions. But again, this is Rome. They couldn't just hang someone or lop off a head. That was dull. No, they had to get creative. They'd stage scenes from myths and legend, and then kill the condemned in ways that matched. Burning? That's Hercules on the pyre. Crucifixion? That's Prometheus. punished for giving fire to man. Drowning? That's Andromeda tied to the rocks, or the shipwreck of Odysseus's crew. In some cases, they even recreated full naval battles, flooding the arena to mimic oceans and letting prisoners drown for dramatic effect. Imagine being executed for petty theft and being told, "Good news! You're Poseidon today. Now get in the boat." The crowd is the engine. But none of this worked without the crowd. The Coliseum held up to 50,000 people. That's an entire city packed into stone bleachers, and they didn't just sit there politely and they demanded blood. This was their reality TV, their live-action morality play. If someone fought bravely, the crowd might shout for mercy. If they cowered or bored them, thumbs down, metaphorically or literally. Death. Children came, women came, senators brought dates, fruit vendors walked the aisles yelling out figs and wine. It wasn't grotesque to them. It was Tuesday. Some cheered for favourite gladiators, others for particular beasts. Some came for the executions, like critics to a bad play, hoping for a spectacular failure. And if the crowd wasn't satisfied, the emperor noticed, a bored audience was a dangerous thing in a fragile empire. Better to give them chaos. Your final scene. You shuffle onto the stage. Your lyre is tuned to nothing. The lion looks hungry. You've seen its handler, a man missing half a face. You're told to begin, so you play, or pretend to. You sing, or whisper. And the crowd watches, amused by the absurdity. A man pretending to be a mythical bard trying to charm a real beast to avoid real death. The lion paces, then growls. You stop. The arena holds its breath. And then, mercy. Again. Not for you, but for the beast. You're yanked back through the tunnel. The lion is saved for another act. Today, you're not breakfast. But the day isn't over. You lie on the stone floor backstage. Around you, other actors, bruised, terrified, some missing fingers, ears, dignity, huddle in the dim. The crowd above you laughs, cheers, roars, because for them, it's just a show. The smell hits you first. Sweat, blood, wine, and something unmistakably human. Fear that's been stewing in leather and iron for hours. You've made it through the morning animal shows and the midday mythological executions. Congratulations. That puts you ahead of several dozen others already scraped off the sand. But now it's prime time. The Coliseum is buzzing like a wasp nest. You hear the brass blare of Roman horns, the chants from the crowd echoing like waves off the stone, and you realise this isn't just entertainment. This is religion. Gladiators. Not quite the rock stars. You think popular culture loves to romanticize gladiators as ancient celebrities. And sure, some of them were. The lucky few. The LeBron Jameses of the bloodsport world. But for every flashy Momeo with gilded armour and a personal masseuse, there were hundreds of poor souls barely trained, fed garbage, and shoved into the arena with weapons that looked suspiciously like broken kitchenware. You? You're somewhere in between. Not a star, not yet dead. The awkward middle child of Roman violence. Your armour doesn't match. Your helmet smells like another man's panic. You were given a wooden sword for warm-up, and the splinters in your palms are the least of your concerns. You wonder if your opponent is as scared as you. Spoiler. Probably not. The arena as career ladder, sort of gladiators, were mostly slaves, prisoners, or condemned men. But there were exceptions. Some citizens voluntarily signed up for the glory, the fame, the cash prizes. These octorati were considered lunatics by many, but in a world where upward mobility was otherwise impossible, a sharp sword and good reflexes could be your ticket out of misery. If you won enough fights, you could earn your freedom, or at least a reputation, and if you died. Well, at least your body would be swept up with a bit more ceremony than the guy who slipped on a fishbone in the street. Sponsors and schemers. Every good gladiator needed a sponsor, a lanista to be exact. These were managers/pimps who owned and trained fighters. Some ran massive gladiator schools like the Ludus Magnus, which sat right next to the Coliseum. Think of them as NFL coaches with fewer morals and more whips. The games themselves were often funded by emperors, generals, or insanely wealthy aristocrats trying to curry favour with the masses. Bread and circuses, remember? Want to become consul? Throw a good bloodbath? Want to distract the people from famine or corruption? Give them a tiger-eating-a-dude extravaganza. Works every time. Let the bets begin. Now here's where it gets spicy. Gambling was woven into every thread of the Coliseum experience. The Romans bet on everything. Who would win, how long it would take, which body part would fly off first. Bookies prowled the stands like sharks in togas. Wealthy patricians wagered fortunes. Poor citizens threw down their last coin, hoping the gods of probability were in a good mood. Cheating was rampant. Poisoned blades, bribed officials, doped up lions. And if a fighter refused to make the fight exciting, well, sometimes he got motivated backstage. The house always wins, even if the house is made of marble and smells like wet iron. The fight itself. When your turn finally comes, you're handed a gladius. It feels heavier than it should. Your opponent is already in the sand. He looks older, meaner, and entirely too calm. The announcer shouts your names, not your real one. The crowd likes nicknames. You're the Gaulish Ghost. He's the Hound of Carthage. The drums start. The gates lock. You circle. He charges. There's no time to think, only react. Steel clashes. You stumble. He grunts. A cut to your thigh. You taste dust. Blood. Then you find an opening. A desperate swing. He falls. It's not over, but he's down. You hover. The crowd roars, but they don't decide your fate. That honour belongs to the editor, the sponsor of today's games. He stands, arm outstretched. Thumbs up? Down? He pauses, milks the moment. Then, mercy. Your opponent is spared. You both live. For now. The post-fight rituals. You're pulled off stage, bleeding, limping, grinning like an idiot. Someone hands you watered wine. Another pats your back. You did well. You weren't incredible, but you were entertaining. That's all that matters. You might get a bonus, or at least a meal that wasn't grown in a gutter. Back in the barracks, other fighters ask for your story. They compare bruises, trade tips. One has a pet monkey he insists brings him luck. You sit down. The pain hits you. And then, strangely, a flicker of pride. You survived. And in Rome, that's practically a promotion. The sun is high, the crowd is drunk, and your tunic is still wet with fear. Welcome to the afternoon shift. Gladiator prime time. You've been cleaned up. Sort of. Someone tossed a bucket of water in your direction and handed you a chipped helmet. You're no longer Orpheus, mythic bard. You're a Mamillo now, a heavyweight. Shield the size of a door, sword like a cleaver, helmet shaped like a fish. Yes, a fish. This is what passes for branding in ancient Rome. Flesh for fame. If you're imagining gladiators as muscle-bound superheroes who lived lives of glory and riches, allow me to gently reset your expectations. Most gladiators were slaves, criminals, or prisoners of war. Training was brutal. Food was fuel, not pleasure. Sleep was brief, broken, and probably filled with dreams of being gored. But gladiators were also celebrities, in a weird, uncomfortable way. Women swooned, men cheered, children collected figurines, merch was sold, oil flasks shaped like your head, graffiti of your victories, and crude fan art scratched into tavern walls. Celadus the Thracian makes the girls see. Imagine being adored and disposable at the same time. Sponsors and showrunners. Every major event had a sponsor, usually a politician trying to climb the greasy marble ladder of Roman power. Putting on a good show meant prestige. Prestige meant votes. Votes meant power. So these men spared no expense. Exotic animals, check. Mock sea battles, flood the arena, reenactments, bring out the papier-mâché minotaurs, and of course, the main event, the duels. Gladiators were paired with careful cruelty, heavy versus light, net versus sword, speed versus brute force. It wasn't just combat, it was casting. The match begins. You're up. You step into the sand. The sun is blinding. The roar of the crowd rolls over you like a wave of lions. Your opponent is already there. Rotarius, light armour, a net and a trident. You hate those. The signal is given. You charge. He dodges. He throws the net. You duck. The trident scrapes your shield. You swing wildly. The fight goes on. A blur of sweat, sand and shouted Latin. The crowd is eating it up. Then he slips. You press your blade to his throat. The arena hushes. Thousands of eyes flick to the sponsor's box. Thumbs? Thumbs. The sponsor extends a hand. A pause. A twist. Mercy. You lower your sword. Your opponent gasps in relief. You've earned another day. Fandom, Roman style. After the fight, you're taken below, patched up with wine and spider webs. You lie on a cot made of who knows what. And then comes a visitor. She's rich, perfumed, draped in jewellery, holding a tiny scroll and a vial of something. She wants a lock of your hair. She says her husband is out of town. This is not unusual. Gladiators were sex symbols. The more scars, the better. It showed you were brave and slightly available. Affairs with upper-class women were common. Illegal, but common. Sometimes they even paid for a gladiator's freedom. Sometimes they paid for their funerals, the price of applause. But don't get too comfortable. Even the most beloved gladiators rarely live past 30. Infection, bad luck, or just one tired misstep could end it. And there was always the risk of becoming too popular. The emperor didn't like competition. Some starfighters were quietly removed, or assigned impossible matches, or simply vanished between shows. You dream of freedom. It dangles like bait. Win enough, survive enough, please the right people. Maybe, just maybe, you'll earn the wooden sword, the rudies, a symbol of manumission, a chance to walk away. But that's tomorrow's dream. For now, you close your eyes and pray the fever in your shoulder isn't serious. The next fight is in 2 days, and you're scheduled to play a Cyclops. Let's talk about the Emperor. No, not metaphorically, literally. The man with the laurel wreath and the all-powerful thumb, the sun around which this chaotic solar system spins. And today, you might just catch his eye. Good luck with that. The Emperor's gaze. The Emperor doesn't just show up at the Coliseum for fun. Well, yes, he does. But it's also a performance, for him, from him. The games are a display of power, yes, but also a chance to be seen as merciful, or strong, or entertaining, depending on his mood. Some emperors loved it. Commodus, for instance, didn't just watch the games. He starred in them, took to the arena like it was his personal cosplay fantasy, fought in staged combats, won every time, of course. Who's gonna beat the emperor? Others were more subtle. They sat in their pulvinar, the imperial box in full regalia, robes billowing, guarded by priests and bodyguards, making tiny gestures with their fingers that meant life or death. A nod, a raised hand, a twist to the wrist. That was enough. And if the emperor gave you a glance, that was your entire personality now. People would write songs about it, paint it on walls. It didn't matter if you lived or died in the end. You had attention, and in Rome, attention was power. Fanboys, groupies, and stage moms. Believe it or not, gladiators had fan bases. Big ones. There were gossip scrolls, graffiti love notes, even tabloid-style whispers in the markets about who was sleeping with whom behind the stables. People fell hard for these fighters, women and men alike. Some gladiators became sex symbols, their sweat-soaked tunics, or lack thereof, the centre of scandalous poetry and drunken tavern debates. Your name might be scratched into a wall in Pompeii, Celadus the Thracian makes all the girls sigh. Or maybe you're the subject of a love charm buried in a wine jug, hoping to snag your favour with forbidden herbs and goat teeth. Of course, it wasn't all fan mail. There were critics. A bad performance could get you heckled mercilessly. Some fans were fickle, and some were senators who bet heavily on your match and really didn't appreciate you bleeding early. But still, fame. Your face might be carved into oil lamps, your fighting style immortalised in sculpture, your nickname, something like the Butcher of Britannia or Tiger Bait, would echo through the corridors. The merch table. Let's not forget the marketing machine. The Coliseum wasn't just an arena, it was an economic engine. Vendors sold wooden swords to kids, clay figurines of famous gladiators, bottles of authentic arena sand. You laugh, but people bought it. There were snacks, fried dormice, garum-soaked bread, honeyed dates, and drinks. Always drinks. Vendors yelling in every direction, each trying to be louder than the lions. And behind it all, the city making money. Every death paid for a new fountain. Every cheer bought another loaf of subsidised bread. You were part of a machine, a cog, yes, but a visible one, a glamorous one, if only briefly. Rehearsed deaths and real consequences. Not every fight in the arena was to the death. Despite what Hollywood says, many matches were carefully choreographed. Gladiators were expensive. Trained fighters weren't easy to replace. Killing them off every weekend was bad business. So unless the crowd demanded blood, or unless someone messed up spectacularly, many bouts ended with one fighter yielding. Honourably. Sweat-drenched, wounded, but alive. But the injuries were real. The pain was real. The infections, the infections, were very real. You might survive the sword only to die from a splinter in the wrong place. There were no antibiotics, only vinegar and a prayer. And if you did die, you'd be carted off to the spoliarium, the grim room beneath the arena where bodies were stripped of gear and jewellery and eventually dragged away for disposal. A night off. Maybe sometimes after a win, you'd get a small reward. Bread. Coin, a visit to the thermae, the baths, to scrub the blood off and remember what warmth felt like. Or maybe a night with one of your admirers, a brief return to feeling human. But then it's back to training, back to diet restrictions, back to waking up sore and sleeping even sorer. No time for a real life, only a staged one. You aren't a person in Rome, you're a symbol, a mascot. A story other people tell to feel something. And when the lights go out in the Coliseum and you lie awake staring at the cracked ceiling of your cell, you wonder how many more stories your body has left to tell. By now, you've survived lions, fake mythological cosplay executions, and the Emperor's mood swings. Congratulations. You're either very lucky, very skilled, or very forgettable. Rome hasn't killed you yet, and that counts as a win. But let's zoom out. Because while you were dodging claws and stabbing for your paycheck, someone up top was counting coins. The Coliseum wasn't just a horror show, it was a financial juggernaut. Blood, but make it profitable. Every part of the games cost money, and made money. The animals, imported, the fighters, trained and housed, the armour, forged, maintained, shined. Even the sand needed to be changed regularly since, well, you know. And yet, somehow, Rome made it profitable. Sponsorships from rich elites, called munerarii, paid for shows in exchange for political clout. A senator might fund an entire week's worth of games just to get some extra votes. Think of it as a Super Bowl ad, but with fewer Doritos and more decapitations. The emperor, of course, topped them all. He funded the biggest spectacles, with the most exotic beasts and the longest programs, not because he needed votes, but because he needed love. Bread and circuses, remember. Feed the people, entertain the people, keep the knives out of your back. Ticketed, suffering admission to the Coliseum was technically free. Emphasis on technically. Seats were assigned based on your class, and the closer you were to the arena, the more important you were. Senators up front, plebs up high, women and slaves stuck in the nosebleeds, if they got in at all. But money flowed in other ways. Bribes for better seats, tips for guards to let you sneak in wine, vendors hustling along the stairwells, selling everything from snacks to charms, blessed by Mars himself. And betting. Oh, the betting. Every fight had stakes. Not just who lived or died, but who bled more, who landed the first blow, who tripped. Gamblers crowded the corridors, whispering odds and exchanging denarii with sweaty palms and hopeful eyes. You were just the meat on which fortunes rose or fell. Schools of pain. Behind every match was a ludus, a gladiator school. Think less Hogwarts, more prison gym with swords. Owned by Lanistae, gladiator trainers, these schools were businesses first and foremost. Lanistae bought, trained and sometimes leased out fighters. They negotiated contracts, arranged matchups, even advertised their star gladiators like modern sports agents. And yes, there were posters, painted on walls, in taverns, with slogans like "See Maximus the Gaul conquer again." The schools made money when their fighters won, or at least didn't die, and a good Lannister could become quite wealthy. Not popular, mind you. Handling slaves who murdered for a living made you less than welcome at dinner parties. But wealthy? Oh yes. And if a fighter became too famous, the Lannister might sell him, or retire him, or more cruelly keep him fighting until the fame faded and the blood stopped selling. Retirement plans. Don't get your hopes up. There was a way out. A gladiator who served long enough, won enough, or somehow charmed the crowd into loving him could earn a wooden sword, the rudies, a symbol of freedom, retirement, peace. A few managed it. They went on to teach, to marry, to open their own ludi. Maybe even become Lannistae themselves, but more often fighters died before they got close. Or they were granted the rudies only to be forced back into the arena by debt, blackmail or sheer Roman cruelty. Freedom was possible, just not probable, legacy on the wall. Maybe, if you were lucky, or infamous, you'd be remembered, carved into a mural, immortalized in a mosaic, praised in graffiti or cursed in satirical verse. Some tombstones of gladiators still survive. Chiseled Latin with proud boasts. Others? Just marks in the dirt, bones in a pit, forgotten even by the beast that fed on them, 'cause in the end you weren't fighting for glory. You were fighting for a chance to not be completely erased. And in Rome, that was the most human thing of all. Let's drop the veil. The Coliseum wasn't just about violence. It was about illusion and spectacle. and making sure the masses left full of emotion but empty of revolt. This wasn't sport. This was theatre, a very bloody, very expensive play, and everyone had a role to perform. Enter the beasts. The animals were exotic, terrifying, and almost always doomed. Lions, tigers, leopards, bears, elephants, crocodiles, even giraffes, if you can believe it. Shipped in from every corner of the empire at unimaginable cost. Some were there to fight, some were there to die, all were there to amaze. The Romans called these shows venations, beast hunts, but make no mistake, they weren't hunts. They were executions with better PR. Hunters, bestiari, would enter the arena armed with spears and dramatic flair, sometimes dressed in foreign costumes to heighten the exotic theme. Think safari, but make it bloodbath. And the animals, starved, agitated, sometimes even drugged. This was not a fair fight. It was a demonstration of control over nature itself. Rome didn't just conquer humans, it conquered the wild, prisoners as props, when there weren't enough gladiators, or when the games needed some extra spice. Organisers turned to another source of entertainment, prisoners. Sometimes they were criminals, sometimes rebels, sometimes just unlucky people from newly conquered territories. Their fates were pre-written. They weren't meant to win. In fact, they weren't even meant to fight most of the time. They were meant to die theatrically. One might be tied to a stake and left for a lion. Another might be forced to reenact a myth, say Icarus falling to his death, or Prometheus being eaten alive. Yes, they would literally stage executions as mythological dramas, costumes and all. It wasn't subtle. The crowd needs a story. See, this is what really kept things running. Not just blood. Narrative. The crowd didn't come to watch people die randomly. They came for justice, for villains to be punished, for Rome to triumph, for morals to be reinforced. That's why some gladiators played barbarians in costume, why some prisoners were dressed as monsters. It wasn't about reality. It was about reinforcing the empire's worldview. Rome is good. Outsiders are dangerous. The emperor is merciful. The gods are watching. And blood must be paid. Stage managers of the macabre. Behind the scenes, dozens of people worked to keep the illusion intact. There were trapdoors and elevators to make animals or fighters appear dramatically. There were pulleys, lifts, stagehands covered in soot and sweat. There were sound effects, costumes and props. At its peak, the Coliseum had a fully functional backstage system more complex than many modern theatres. It wasn't just about death. It was about producing death. And if you were part of that crew, you were invisible. Vital, but invisible. You might sleep below the stands, eat cold porridge for breakfast, and haul lion carcasses by noon. Also, the illusion could live another day. The roar and the rot. The audience didn't smell the blood. Not really. They were too far away. But you did. You, the gladiator, or the prisoner, or the stagehand hauling limbs off stage. You knew the rot behind the roar. You saw the maggots in the sand, the sticky handprints on stone, the rats bold enough to steal from corpses. You saw the truth. And the truth was, this wasn't about glory. It was about distraction. Because as long as the crowds were cheering, they weren't rioting. As long as there was blood in the arena, there didn't have to be blood in the streets. Rome fed you violence to keep your hunger for justice at bay. And for now, it worked. You're alive. Somehow. Covered in bruises, sweat, glory, and whatever that sticky stuff was on the sand that wasn't yours. You made it through the day. Congratulations. But before you go imagining a happily ever after, let's take a moment to talk about what comes next, because in ancient Rome, the aftermath could be just as bizarre as the fight. The gift shop of the damned. No, really. If you won a few matches and survived long enough, your name might end up on commemorative pottery, a terracotta bust, a wax figure in someone's dining room. Or maybe you just became trivia, the answer to someone's question about that guy who fought the crocodile and lived. Sometimes you'd get gifts, laurel crowns, cheap wine, a tunic that didn't smell like death, maybe even a wooden sword, the rudis, a symbolic reward for freedom. Of course, freedom came with caveats. Sure, you could walk out of the ludus, but with no money, no family, and a back shaped like a trident's chew toy, what were you supposed to do? Gladiator school didn't exactly prep you for office work, so maybe you stayed as a trainer, a mentor, or a bodyguard for some senator with too many enemies and not enough sense. Or maybe you vanished, became a story parents told their kids. Eat your lentils or the retired gladiator will get you. Memory is a bloody business. Rome remembers its spectacles, its architecture, its triumphs. But the gladiators? Often they were footnotes. Your name might live on in some scratched graffiti, a faded mosaic, a blurry record from an old senator's guest list. But for most, silence, buried in sand and shadow. Still, there's something strangely eternal about it. You stood beneath a boiling sun, in front of tens of thousands, and they watched you. You made people feel something. Terror, excitement, revulsion, desire. And in a world obsessed with legacy, you left one, even if it was soaked in blood. Final bow. So what did we learn? That job interviews in ancient Rome involved slightly more tigers than LinkedIn. That survival was a performance, and death a headline. That you could become famous for dying well, and forgotten for living quietly. That sometimes being reduced to a role, a fighter, a beast, a sacrifice, is exactly what people want from you. But somewhere, beneath all the noise and the screaming and the sunburn, there was still you, still a person, still wondering how your life came to this. All because you were born in the wrong place, at the wrong time, with the wrong amount of money and the wrong last name. And now, as we leave the Coliseum behind, its walls still echoing with the sounds of iron and agony, you can finally breathe. Not because you're safe, but because the show is over. That brings us to the end of tonight's journey. I hope this strange little excursion into ancient brutality helped lull your mind towards sleep. And if your eyes are still open, don't worry. I've got something else to help. Just listen to the soft sound of falling rain. Nothing to picture, nothing to remember. Just drops on stone, and slowly, gently, sleep. Good night, and may your dreams have fewer lions.